Tonight, New Mexico authorities with tragic revelations to a week-long mystery, saying Jean Hackman died of heart disease and complications from Alzheimer's, likely a week after his wife Betsy died of the rare, deadly disease hantavirus.
Police have just uncovered shocking new details in the mysterious deaths of Jean Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa, and what they revealed has left investigators stunned. What was initially thought to be a tragic but natural passing has now taken a dark and unexpected turn. Authorities have confirmed that new evidence found inside their secluded Santa Fe home has raised serious questions about the final days of the legendary actor and his wife. But the biggest twist? A suspect is now in custody, and their connection to the couple may change everything we thought we knew. What really happened behind those locked doors? Stay with us as we reveal the chilling truth that police have just exposed.
Death of legendary actor Jean Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa, the couple along with their dog found dead in their New Mexico home this week by a maintenance worker. Listen, this is part of the 911 call.
Are they awake?
I have no idea.
Are they breathing?
I have no idea. I'm not inside the house. It's closed. It's locked. I can't go in. But I see them. She's laying down on a floor from the window.
A chilling discovery inside the Hackman residence. When police first arrived at Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's secluded Santa Fe home, they expected a routine welfare check. An elderly couple who had gone silent, perhaps due to illness or a medical emergency. But as they stepped onto the quiet property, something felt off. The house was still, eerily untouched, with no signs of movement. The front door was locked from the inside, the windows secured, and yet, no one had heard from the couple in days. It wasn't until security personnel peered through a side window that the grim truth became clear. Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were dead.
Officials found the home's door open, prescription pills scattered next to Hackman's wife. Police say they found the body of a German Shepherd in the bathroom closet. 2 other dogs were found alive on the property.
Deputies forced their way inside, immediately struck by a sense of unnatural stillness. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no obvious cause of death, but something about the scene felt wrong. Hackman's lifeless body was found near the mudroom, his slippers still on, his walking cane lying beside him, as if he had collapsed mid-step. Betsy Arakawa was discovered just feet away in the bathroom, her body positioned near a space heater, a bottle of pills spilled across the counter. And then there was the dog, their beloved German Shepherd, lying motionless not far from them. Yet strangely, 2 other dogs in the house were still alive. Investigators moved through the home carefully, noting the eerie state of preservation. Despite the Santa Fe climate, certain parts of Arakawa's body showed signs of mummification, something that suggested she had been dead for longer than initially assumed. But when and how? If Hackman had passed first, why had Arakawa not called for help? Or had she tried and failed?
Well, first of all, anytime you have 2 bodies deceased at the same place at the same time, that in and of itself is suspicious. And then, of course, the dog also being deceased added to that suspicion.
Law enforcement initially leaned toward a natural causes theory, given Hackman's age. He was 95 after all. But then, the timeline didn't add up. When they checked his pacemaker records, the device showed its last recorded event was February 17, 2025. Nearly 10 days before their bodies were found on February 26. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. If Hackman had died on the 17th, then what had happened to Betsy? Had she been alive for days afterward, alone in the house? Had she succumbed to starvation, a medical condition, or something else entirely? One of the biggest concerns came from the state of the house itself. Everything was in perfect order. No overturned furniture, no ransacked drawers, no signs of distress. It was as if life had simply stopped. The couple's phones were found nearby, fully charged but untouched, their last recorded calls from weeks prior. They also discovered a 2025 monthly planner left open on the kitchen counter, its most recent entries from February 15 and 16. Then, nothing. No appointments, no notes, no plans, just silence.
The reason the digital information from both of their cell phones is so important, Natasha, is because cell phones can track movement. And that's what they are going to look into. When did those cell phones cease not only to be used, but cease to move?
As investigators dug deeper, they became fixated on one peculiar question. What happened to the German Shepherd? If this had been an environmental issue, carbon monoxide poisoning for example, why had only one of the 3 dogs died? Toxicology tests were immediately ordered for the deceased pet, with experts suspecting poisoning. But if poison was in the air, why was Betsy found in the bathroom, surrounded by pills? Had she taken something on purpose, or had someone given her something without her knowing? Then there was the house's locked door mystery. With no forced entry and everything secured from the inside, it suggested one of 2 things. Either both had died alone together, or someone had been there, carefully ensuring no one would suspect foul play. Neighbors in the private Santa Fe community were interviewed, but none had seen or heard anything unusual. The Hackmans were deeply private, rarely seen outside, preferring a quiet life away from Hollywood. That made it even harder for police to pin down their last known interactions. The only clue investigators had was a maintenance worker's call, the one who had initially raised the alarm after failing to get in touch with the couple for several days. As forensic teams combed through the home, they uncovered one final unsettling detail: a single, unreturned voicemail on Betsy Arakawa's phone. Left on February 18, just a day after Hackman's estimated death, it was from an unknown number. The message was brief, but the voice on the other end sounded tense, rushed. "Betsy, it's me. Call me back, now. This is important." But she never did. And that's when everything changed.
There's also pacemaker data here. What do you make of this?
This information is critical. It shows that Jean Hackman's last use of his heart was clear back on February 17th. So this was 9 days earlier. That says a lot in terms of this timeline that they're trying to develop. And it also explains some of the mummification, as we're told, far into death of these bodies. This explains a lot to us.
And what do you make of some of the details? No carbon monoxide on the bodies. I know many minds immediately went there due to the nature of the 2 bodies and a dog. Also, no trauma on the bodies.
Right. This is what I'm seeing, Natasha, is you see Jean Hackman in the mudroom, and his glasses are right there. His cane is right there, as if he were walking and moving. And then suddenly,
the suspicious timeline and shocking clue. As investigators worked to piece together the final days of Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa, one detail quickly became impossible to ignore. The timeline didn't make sense. From the moment authorities stepped into the couple's secluded Santa Fe home, they were met with contradictions, unanswered questions, and one chilling clue that changed everything. At first, law enforcement assumed that Hackman and Arakawa had passed away together, likely within a short time frame, but once forensic experts examined Hackman's pacemaker records, a disturbing truth came to light. His last recorded heart activity was on February 17, 2025. That meant the legendary actor had been dead for at least 10 days before their bodies were discovered on February 26. If Hackman had died first, then what happened to Betsy? And even more unsettling, why didn't she seek help? As investigators worked through the evidence, more disturbing inconsistencies surfaced. The home was completely secured from the inside, with no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows. The couple's phones were found untouched, fully charged but with no outgoing calls made after February 16. If Betsy had been alive after Hackman's death, why hadn't she called 911, a family member, or even a friend? Then came the even bigger mystery: the German Shepherd. The couple owned 3 dogs, yet only one was found dead, lying just 10 feet away from Betsy. The other 2 dogs, one inside the house and one outside, were perfectly fine. If the deaths had been due to an environmental issue, carbon monoxide poisoning, a gas leak, or even food contamination, why was only one of the 3 animals affected? Toxicology tests were immediately ordered, but early results ruled out any airborne toxins in the home. With no external trauma, no forced entry, and no environmental hazards, authorities turned their focus toward the medications found near Betsy's body. Pills were scattered across the bathroom counter, some still inside an open prescription bottle. At first glance, this could have pointed to an accidental overdose, but something was off. The labels on the bottles didn't match the prescriptions Betsy was known to take. Some of the pills were unidentified, leading forensic teams to test them for foreign substances, including possible sedatives or poisons. Then, another major clue emerged: a 2025 monthly planner found open on the kitchen counter. The last entry was dated February 16, with nothing written after that.
Yes, initially. And again, I thought it was interesting that the sheriff didn't want to say exactly what medications were there. He said they were for thyroid, he said they were for heart. But remember, oftentimes you take pain relief for heart pain. Could they have been, and this is often prescribed, fentanyl for heart pain? We don't know that. We don't know what was in those pills, but I think it's really important that he withheld that, citing HIPAA, and he also said those pills are going to be key to determine what happened.
Investigators studied the previous entries, looking for patterns or unusual appointments. The last few notes seemed ordinary: doctor's visits, grocery lists, small reminders. But something caught their attention. On February 15, a cryptic message was written in Betsy's handwriting. "Meet at usual place, bring everything." Everything? What did that mean? And who was she meeting? Police immediately pulled phone records from both Hackman and Arakawa, looking for any unusual activity before their deaths. What they found raised even more red flags. At 8:37 p.m. on February 16, a call was made from Betsy's phone to an unknown number. The call lasted only 47 seconds. No other outgoing calls were made after that, and the number was unregistered, meaning it couldn't be traced to a known contact. Then, at 10:12 a.m. on February 18, a voicemail was left on Betsy's phone from a different unknown number. The message was short, but the voice sounded tense and urgent. "Betsy, it's me. Call me back now. This is important." She never did. At this point, investigators realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a natural death. If Betsy had been alive for days after Hackman, had she been trapped, afraid, forced into silence? And what was she supposed to bring to that meeting? To make things even more unsettling, security footage from the couple's gated community was pulled to track any visitors to the residence in the days leading up to their deaths. While no footage showed any forced entry, one suspicious vehicle was identified: a black sedan spotted near the Hackman home on February 17 at 11:24 p.m. The car was parked for 27 minutes before it drove away. No deliveries were scheduled that night, no guests were expected. And yet, someone had been there. With mounting questions and no clear cause of death, forensic teams worked tirelessly to analyze every detail: the pills, the planner, the voicemail, the unknown visitors. And then came the final, most shocking revelation. Police had a suspect in custody. Their identity was still undisclosed, but law enforcement confirmed that this individual had direct ties to the Hackmans and was being questioned for potential involvement. Suddenly, the case was no longer just a mystery, it was a crime.
When the bodies of Jean Hackman, his wife, and one of their dogs were found last week at their home in Santa Fe, it was unclear what circumstances had led to their deaths.
Santa Fe 911, what is it? Is it emergency?
Investigators have been piecing together the couple's movements. They now say they believe his wife, Betsy Arakawa, had died around a week before him.
It's not uncommon to find someone down on the floor as part of a terminal collapse, so to speak, and that may very well have been what happened to Ms. Hackman.
Test results showed she'd contracted a rare virus called hantavirus, which can be transmitted from animals to humans and can be fatal. And that Jean Hackman died a week later of cardiovascular problems.
The question was he aware that Ms. Hackman had died? And I think that question's difficult to answer, but I can tell you that he was in an advanced state of Alzheimer's, and it's quite possible that he was not aware that she was deceased.
The suspect and the dark turn in the case. The moment police announced they had a suspect in custody, everything about the case took a dark and unexpected turn. What had initially appeared to be a tragic but natural passing of Jean Hackman and Betsy Arakawa was now something far more sinister. Investigators had been struggling to piece together the events that led to their mysterious deaths, but with this arrest, the entire narrative shifted. It was no longer just about finding answers, it was about uncovering the truth behind what was starting to look like a carefully orchestrated crime. For days, authorities had been analyzing every clue, every detail, every inconsistency. The timeline of events simply didn't make sense. Jean Hackman's last known activity, recorded through his pacemaker, showed that he had likely died on February 17, nearly 10 days before their bodies were found. But Betsy Arakawa's time of death remained unclear. Certain details, including the state of her body and the medications found near her, suggested that she may have been alive for days after Jean's passing. If that was the case, why hadn't she sought help? Why hadn't she reached out to anyone? Investigators had been combing through security footage from their gated Santa Fe community, looking for any sign of an intruder or unexpected visitor. Then they found it. A black sedan, appearing on the night of February 17, parked outside the Hackman residence for precisely 27 minutes before leaving. At first, the driver's identity was unknown. There was no record of any scheduled maintenance, deliveries, or guests that evening. But once detectives traced the vehicle's registration, they discovered it belonged to someone directly connected to the Hackmans, someone whose presence at the home that night raised far more questions than it answered. When police finally brought the suspect in for questioning, they were met with immediate denial. The suspect insisted that they had not seen Jean or Betsy in weeks and had no knowledge of what had happened to them. But the evidence told a different story. Phone records showed that Betsy had placed a call to this individual on February 16, the last outgoing call ever made from her phone. That call lasted 47 seconds. No other calls were made after that. Then, on February 18, one day after Jean was estimated to have died, a voicemail was left on Betsy's phone from an unknown number. The message was brief, but the voice sounded tense, almost urgent. "Betsy, it's me. Call me back now. This is important." She never did. That voicemail was the last recorded activity on her phone. As authorities continued to build their case, they turned their focus to the financial records of both Jean and Betsy. What they found was unsettling. In the months leading up to their deaths, large sums of money had been quietly transferred out of a shared account. At first, the transfers seemed random, small amounts moved every few weeks. But as detectives dug deeper, they found a pattern. The money wasn't just being transferred, it was being funneled into an account linked to the suspect. The investigation took another chilling turn when forensic specialists examined the prescription medications found near Betsy's body. Most were standard prescriptions, medications she had been taking for years. But mixed in with them were unidentified pills, ones that had no record of ever being prescribed to her.
Well, to some degree, they have now answered many questions, but investigators have been trying to piece together the couple's final movements in that week, looking at CCTV, looking at phone records. But this virus that they say Betsy Arakawa contracted, hantavirus, they say is something they do see several times a year in Santa Fe, though it is pretty rare. It starts off as flu-like symptoms, so it could be mistaken for something else, and of course it can be very serious. But it does paint this rather grim picture that she had died first and that Jean Hackman was in the house alone for a week or so, and that his Alzheimer's means it is very unclear as to how much he would have known as to what was going on.
Toxicology tests revealed that both Jean and Betsy had traces of a foreign substance in their systems. The nature of this substance wasn't immediately disclosed to the public, but its presence confirmed one thing: neither of their deaths had been natural. With every new discovery, detectives began to piece together a terrifying possibility. What if Jean Hackman's death had not been an accident or the result of natural causes? What if Betsy had been alive for days afterward, not because she was unaware of what had happened, but because she had been trapped, unable to call for help? Investigators now suspected that Betsy might have been deliberately isolated, either through coercion or something far worse. Had she discovered what had happened to Jean too late? Had she been silenced before she could reveal the truth? As the case unfolded, detectives confronted the suspect with the mounting evidence: the phone records, the financial transfers, the security footage, the toxicology reports. Each piece painted a clearer and darker picture. But the suspect remained evasive, offering vague explanations and contradictions. They admitted to being in contact with Betsy, but claimed the conversations were unrelated to her or Jean's deaths. They denied ever visiting the house. But when police presented them with the security footage of their car outside the home on February 17, they had no explanation. The more investigators dug, the more suspicious the circumstances became. Why had someone attempted to access Betsy's phone multiple times after February 17, failing the passcode attempts? Why had Jean's health records shown no immediate decline before his sudden death? And why had Betsy written a cryptic note in her planner just days before, saying, "Meet at usual place. Bring everything, be careful"? Who was she warning? Detectives now believed that Jean Hackman's death had not been natural at all. The placement of his body near his walking cane, the lack of distress signals, the absence of any signs of struggle. It was as if he had collapsed on the spot. But something wasn't right. If he had suffered a medical emergency, why hadn't Betsy immediately called for help? Why had she instead seemingly vanished from communication altogether? The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. Authorities now had enough evidence to suspect that the Hackmans had been targeted, but for what purpose? Was it financial exploitation, a personal vendetta, or something even more complex? The suspects' refusal to cooperate only deepened their suspicions. Then came the final discovery. As forensic teams combed through the suspects' personal records, they found a history of financial disputes, failed business ventures, and a pattern of connections to wealthy individuals who had died under suspicious circumstances. This wasn't just a random acquaintance of the Hackmans. This was someone who had a track record of being involved in high-profile financial manipulations.